Good evening. I'd like to welcome you and call to order the February 26th Port Orchard City Council regular meeting. Personal.
I didn't know if I should answer.
All right. We are to the approval of our agenda. Are there any additions or subtractions?
Mayor, I have one under the consent agenda, item C, if we could add the excusal of Councilmember Scott Diener from tonight's meeting for personal reasons.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion for that excusal on the consent agenda? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Councilmember Diener has been added to the agenda. Any other modifications or additions to the agenda tonight?
No, Mayor, I'd move to approve the agenda as amended.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Does anybody object to the agenda as presented? Hearing none, the agenda is approved by unanimous consent. We're to our first citizen comment period. Jerry? Thomas? You're good too? All right. So we'll close that citizen comment period. We have another one at the end of the meeting. And we're to our consent agenda.
Mr. Mayor, I move we approve the consent agenda as modified.
Second.
Second by Councilmember Rosa Pepe. Further discussion of the consent agenda? Anybody object to the consent agenda this evening? Okay. Hearing no objection, the consent agenda is approved by unanimous consent. I don't see the Fathoms Court here, so maybe if they show up here in a little bit, we'll went and got my pin to show my support, but I had the privilege of participating as a judge in their recent pageant. It was a great experience, but we'll watch for them. We'll get on to our business items. The first is item 7A, adoption of an ordinance amending Port Orchard Municipal Code, chapters 2.74, City Hall facilities. Clerk Reinerson.
Yes, good evening, Mayor and Council. So periodically, staff reviews the Port Orchard Municipal Code to make sure it's relevant to today. In reviewing the Port Orchard Municipal Code, chapter 2.74, City Hall facilities, it was noticed that 2 of the rooms of the City Hall were formally named and adopted by resolution. Resolution number 29-13 formally names the conference room number 306 to the Carolyn Powers Conference Room. And resolution number 33-07 formally named the council chambers to the Robert G. Geiger Council Chambers. Therefore, to be consistent with the adopted resolution, staff has prepared an ordinance updating the Port Orchard Municipal Code reflecting past actions of the City Council. Staff recommends approving the ordinance as presented.
Councilmember Clausen.
Mayor, I move to adopt an ordinance approving the amendments to the Port Orchard Municipal Code, chapter 2.74, City Hall facilities as presented.
Second.
Ellie seconded that motion. Any further discussion of the naming of our rooms? Okay. All in favor of approving the ordinance amending the Port Orchard Municipal Code 2.74 City Hall facilities, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. We are to 7B, which is adoption of a resolution amending resolution number 1880, fees of use for City Hall facilities. Clerk Reinerson.
Yes. So on February 26, 2019, the City Council had a discussion regarding after-hours use of City Hall. During that discussion, it was raised that the rates of the facility is outdated in relation to the current staff's hourly and overtime rates. Staff was asked to bring forward an amendment to the resolution with today's rates. Staff worked with the Finance Department to capture the current hourly rate and overtime rates for the City Clerk's office employees who are tasked with scheduling and being present during the use. The hourly after-hours staff charges went from $35 per hour to $100 per hour. The audiovisual equipment went from the unknown amount and needed to be calculated each time was changed to an hourly rate of $50 per regular working hours and $100 per hour after regular hours. Lastly, the rate for room setup went from $20 per hour to a flat rate of $50. And an amended resolution reflecting the above changes has been provided to you as part of the packet for your consideration. Staff recommends approval of the resolution as presented.
Councilmember Cachardi?
Mayor, I move to adopt a resolution approving the amendments to resolution number 1880, adjusting the hourly rates of staff as presented.
Second it.
Second by Councilmember Clausen. We had talked about, we didn't take it to a work study, but I remember we talked about this here at the dais, and we felt that in particular, the after-hours costs, we needed to better capture staff's time. Does this, hopefully this reflects the conversation and the dialogue we had that evening.
It does.
So any questions, Brandy, on this? Okay. So we'd be voting on the adoption, Councilmember Chang?
I looked at it, and I certainly appreciate that we want to make sure that we're capturing the costs of actual services provided. I am concerned that a 2-hour rental of City Hall would go from $150 to $280, including the room rental and the fees. Actually, excuse me, it's more than, yeah, $150 to $280. I think that's almost uninviting, if not cost prohibitive. And I kind of feel that this is cost recovery gone amok, so I will be voting against this.
Okay. And in reality, this is the after-hours cost. It's not, if someone wants to come and use the building during the day, our expenses, aren't what they are if I'm bringing in somebody on an overtime rate and their benefits. So Councilmember Ashby?
Well, I just wanted to ask the city clerk, how many times are the facilities used annually by a group that would actually have to pay? Because government entities are not charged. So I'm suspecting that it's a very low number, and it's kind of a moot point, I believe. I bet it's not more than, well, you should know.
Yeah, so most of the time that's being used that actually has to pay for that after hours is organizations wanting to do depositions. And most of the time they will reserve a room from 8 to 5. And I do not believe that they've had to pay an after-hour fee because they typically wrap it up between 2 and 4. And most of the organizations that use it on the weekends or evenings is another governmental agency, or they're a non-for-profit. They fit within that description that allows them to be here at no charge, and staff is here.
Right, and that was my assumption, and so although it's going from 150 to 280 by Councilman Chang's calculation, I don't think it's truly going to affect many, if so. So I'm supportive of it.
Other comments or questions?
Well, I would agree. It probably doesn't practically affect anybody.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking if we ever wanted to offer City Hall as perhaps a place that a convention might want to meet, I know that's never going to happen, but let's say that with the new community center, there are more places to. It's possible, I think, that a profitable organization may want a place to meet. This is certainly could be an inviting location with its audiovisual capabilities, however outdated they may be. So I'm just worried that this is certainly going to be less appealing as that type of a venue. And I know we're probably not losing any sleep over it because we're not counting that money. But I think it makes it uninviting as a potential venue.
Not to belabor the point, but just for a convention or a group to come here, particularly in this room, we don't allow food in here, so that makes it unattractive all by itself.
Sure.
Well, and I just think that this amendment is necessary, as we should be at least recovering our actual costs.
Right.
At the end of the day, and so, those fees are what they are, and I think if you go out and look at, competing private enterprise for conference space, you're gonna find that amount's a lot higher than just us recovering our actual costs.
And I don't believe we're even coming close to recovering our costs. We're just trying to recover our staff time.
Yeah.
It's the labor. Councilmember Clausen?
I was just going to add, it's not something that if we find out later that it is prohibiting groups, we can't come back and readdress it. So at this point, I'm supporting it.
And if I can just add, there, the resolution, or excuse me, the ordinance that we just amended prior to this action, there is already a clause in our code that states that the mayor or designee shall be authorized to waive fees rule on any exceptions or clarifying rules or provisions of this policy. Exceptions or clarifications shall be in written, signed format. So the mayor does have the authority to waive those fees should the council feel that it is
If we've got to have.
Prohibiting.
If we have to have that convention here.
absolutely.
I think we'll make an exception. All right, further discussion? All right, so we'll be voting on the adoption of a resolution, amending resolution 1880, fees for use of city hall facilities. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? We have one in opposition. Okay. So we are on to our next business item, which is 7C, adoption of a resolution authorizing code enforcement officer and the city attorney to initiate a lawsuit for a warrant of abatement at 1691 Southeast Crawford Road. And it's not Mr. Bond, it's Ms. Cates that's going to take this one.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. So the City of Port Orchard has been pursuing the abatement of 1691 Southeast Crawford Road under the provisions of Chapter 3580 RCW as adopted by Port Orchard Municipal Code Section 2212. The current owner purchased the property in 2008, and there have been recurring enforcement at this location 2009, 2012, 2014, and 2017 present, all of which have been unresolved. For unpermitted additions and modifications, rental occupancy of an unsafe structure, nuisance conditions, and dilapidation. I won't read all of the bullet points, but there are a number of specifics included in here and that are more detailed in the resolution itself. On August 14th, 2018, the city issued a complaint and notice of hearing stating in what respects the property was dangerous or unfit and giving notice that a hearing would be held on August 30th, at which all parties in interest would be given the right to file an answer to the complaint, to appear in person or otherwise, and to give testimony at the time and place in the complaint. A contractor appeared at the hearing on behalf of the owner and stated that he had already begun cleanup. He subsequently submitted a course of action that addressed some of the issues, but they needed further inspections, and he stated that subletting will no longer be a problem. The city issued its findings and order on September 10th, 2018, finding that the property contains dangerous buildings as contemplated by RCW 3580 and POMC 2212, and the buildings and real property are public nuisances, attracting and harboring vagrants and creating fire, health, and safety hazards. All notices were properly served in accordance with Chapter 3580 RCW and Chapter 2212 POMC. There has been no further contact or response from the owner, tenant, property manager, contractor, or anyone else associated with the property. No further work to correct the violations and no compliance with the order. The property and carport, which had been cleaned up, are again full of junk. The next step to secure compliance with the city's notice and order is to obtain a warrant of abatement from the Kitsap County Superior Court. Authorization to initiate lawsuits on behalf of the city must be obtained from the Port Orchard City Council. So the recommendation of staff is to provide authorization to the code enforcement officer and the city attorney to move forward with the lawsuit to seek a warrant of abatement.
Councilmember
Mayor, I move to adopt a resolution authorizing the Port Orchard Code Enforcement Officer and City Attorney to undertake such actions as are necessary and appropriate to initiate and pursue a lawsuit for a warrant of abatement for the property located at 1691 Southeast Crawford Road on behalf of the City of Port Orchard as presented.
Second.
Councilmember Ashby seconded that motion. So, Mr. Bond, what do you, I mean, we assume we're successful here, and we're gonna get an abatement order, and then we're probably going to hire a contractor to demolish this. I know you just returned to the office yesterday. Do you have a rough estimate what our expenses will be associated with that?
I mean, our approximate per house cost to remove a single-family residence is in the $20,000 to $30,000 range. I assume that we'll be filing a lien on the property and then hoping to recoup some of that money at some future date, which will replenish our account. We currently budget, I believe, for 2 abatements per year.
Correct.
So this is one.
Okay. Councilmember Chang?
Do we know if it's currently occupied and if anyone would be displaced by the abatement?
I'm the hearings officer for these initial complaints when they're filed, and so at the time of the hearing, which was at least 6 months ago, it was occupied by a variety of people, and then being subletted by those people to have even more people come into the home, but I don't know the current condition of it.
Just
Councilmember Ashby?
was this, because I believe this address is near where the tornado hit, was it affected at all by the tornado?
No, this is outside of the path.
Okay.
Unfortunately not.
Barely, outside the path.
Councilmember Rose Bisbee.
It's funny you should mention that. I actually drove by the property today, looking at it, and I don't think there's been any improvements since the August. In fact, it probably looks worse, which is kind of a shame because there are some properties on that road that are in fairly good shape and being taken care of. So wholeheartedly support this motion.
The day that, with the hearing, matter of fact, so Mr. Bond was in my chair, and I sat over there in his chair and listened, and the contractor assured Mr. Bond that he was gonna take care of all this, and it was an interesting process. Mr. Clausen?
Yeah, just a question for the attorney, for the layperson. Could you just walk through the process of going through the Superior Court to get this abatement? What's entailed in that?
So the city would file a complaint for warrant of abatement that would detail what's basically been detailed in this resolution, and say that we're going to be seeking a warrant of abatement, which means we file this complaint with Superior Court. We serve it on the property owners of record. They have an opportunity to file a responsive pleading and come to the hearing. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. And then they have, once they have responded, the city will file a motion for warrant of abatement, which goes into more detail about why we have the city has the right to have this type of order from the court. And at that hearing, we generally either are given or denied a warrant of abatement. So it's a fairly summary process. It takes a little while because you have to serve the property owner, and you have to give them some time to respond, but overall, it's not a lengthy process.
So in essence, the current property owner would have an opportunity to have their day in court if they,
Yes,
for some reason, want to object to this order, and it would be up to the judge to make that final decision.
that's correct,
So,
yes.
Thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Bond or Ms. Cates? Okay. You'll be voting on adoption of a resolution authorizing code enforcement officer and city attorney to initiate a lawsuit of warrant of abatement at 1691 Southeast Crawford Road. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. The motion carries. Got two more items on our agenda, and then we'll come back, we'll take care of the princesses and their presentation to us. So we're at 7D, approval of an updated interlocal agreement with Kitsap County Public Works regarding traffic signal repair and maintenance. Mr. Dorsey.
Thank you, Your Honor, council members. On September 14th, 2010, after many years of signal maintenance performed by the city of Bremerton, the city of Port Orchard entered into an interlocal agreement, or ILA, with Kitsap County Public Works for continued traffic signal intersection street light repair and maintenance. With the recent intersection modifications associated with the Tremont Street widening project, the ILA needs to be updated. Unlike the previous ILA with automatic renewal, this agreement is for a term of 2 years with 2 one-year renewal options that require prior written notification and consent from both parties. Staff recommends that the council authorize the mayor to execute a contract, thereby updating the interlocal agreement between Kitsap County and the city of Port Orchard related to annual traffic signal intersection streetlight repair and maintenance for a term of 2 years with 2 one-year renewal options with prior consent from both parties. And there are no fiscal impacts because even though this agreement was 7 years old, or 9 years old, the CPIU had continued to be updated, and that was part of our budget. So nothing's really changing other than the exhibits have been updated.
Councilmember Lucarelli.
I move to approve a contract thereby updating the interlocal agreement, ILA, between Kitsap County and the city of Port Orchard related to annual traffic signal intersection street light repair and maintenance for a term of 2 years with 2 one-year renewal options upon prior consent from both parties.
Second.
Second by Councilmember Cachardi. Any questions for Mr. Dorsey on this matter? Councilmember Chang?
Do we believe the county will be more responsive than the city of Bremerton has been, or about the same?
No,
Been there for 9 years.
we've been with Kitsap County since 2010. The reason we switched, when I came here in 2008, the city of Bremerton was non-responsive, but that was during their decline with personnel and their program in general. That's why we switched. Kitsap County has always been responsive.
Questions for Mr. Dorsey? Okay, hearing none. Be voting on the approval of an updated interlocal agreement with Kitsap County Public Works regarding traffic signal repair and maintenance. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. To our last business item, which is 7E, approval of the March 12th, 2019 council meeting minutes. Member Ashby?
Yeah, I would move to approve the council meeting minutes from the regular meeting of March 12th as presented.
Second.
Second by Councilmember Chang. Any discussion of those minutes? Hearing none. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I have one abstention, Councilmember Kutzardi. All right, we are finished with our business items. Let's circle back to our presentations. We have Helene Jensen here, and I see Sharon King, and we have a prince, a duchess, a queen, and some princesses. So if you'd like to approach the podium and let us know what you're here about tonight.
I'd like to make sure my pets.
Good evening, and I apologize greatly for being late. I got my wires crossed. I thought it was 7, so I thought I was early. So surprise! So thank you again for letting us come and present again. We are very excited with the brand new court, and this year we have a prince, and we are excited to go out in the public and to help be dignitaries for our grand city and do all kinds of fun things coming up. And so without further ado, I'm going to invite them all to come up. We are missing 2. One's at a conference, and the other one's sick with the flu. So we have just 5, right? Can I count? Yes. So each one of them will come to the microphone. They will announce their name and what their platform was or is. And so we'll start with Corey. Just say your name, Prince Corey.
Hi, I'm Prince Corey. My platform is overcoming obstacles, bullying, and the power of self-confidence.
Hi, I'm Duchess Veronica, and my platform is inspiring girls to be confident and bold. Thank you. Hello, I'm Queen Rosalind, and my platform is the Global Girls Alliance. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Princess Zoe, and my platform is anti-bullying. Thank you. Hi, my name is Kaylee, Princess Kaylee, and my platform was cooking and baking for a purpose. Thank you.
So at this time, as always, they have buttons and pins that they're going to go around and see if you guys would like to purchase them. I see that our mayor has our pin on. Thank you for helping us. And while they're doing that, we're also wanting to have a picture with you guys, as we always do. And we also have our Easter egg hunt coming up that I just want to make sure that everyone comes and participates, brings your grandkids, your kids, your neighbor, your whoever you want to. I have larger posters. If you have a poster that we can, a bulletin board we can put it on. Is there one here that we can leave it on? Is there one? Okay. So go, ladies and gentlemen, go. Do your thing.
Where would you like that picture? Up here on the dais or all of us down below?
Usually we do it all down below, but we can come up from behind and do it. Which would you guys think would be the best?
Good to see you.
What do you think would be the best?
And
Have
I
them
a
come down
collection
below
here.
or us go behind there?
What?
Yeah.
No, I want one of the, just
Right,
the round
yeah.
pins. Yeah, yeah, that's perfect, thank you.
It looks like Caesar's Palace.
Oh, okay.
It's for a collection.
I'll go
Yeah,
for one.
We're running out of room.
You may have to get another,
I'll give you a donation. I've got a couple of pins.
Dollar pin, thank you.
How we doing? Good.
A dollar pin.
So where are you guys going this weekend?
I already have one. Thank you.
Which is which and how much?
Yeah.
I'll do the $5 one.
Do you have another
Thank
big
you.
poster?
Right, I was
Very
gonna
good.
take one,
Touch
I was gonna take one to my work.
Thank you.
At the school district. That's,
exactly.
okay.
We can maybe all gather around. You know, what about that Imagine Port Orchard backdrop? Or do you want the dais and the flags?
We could sit down in front of it. We might block it.
Thank you. It's going pretty awesome. Thank you.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah,
You guys-
good idea.
Thank you, no.
Good. Trying to quit?
Yeah.
New Year's Lent or
Yeah,
Lent?
yeah, that's,
Lent.
I'm on the 12-step program, so.
Really?
Mhm.
Aw.
John, you've been on step 1 for 10 years.
I know. Slow learner.
Wow.
Oh, boy, look at that.
Boy, what's going on?
Crowd here.
Oh, yeah.
Fantastic.
Anytime.
Our pleasure. Great.
However, Commissioner Scott's challenge, Helene, for you guys to cough up as much money.
How much did they cough up?
I don't know, but they finished off our bag.
Oh, we killed him.
Yeah, we killed them.
So how much did you get from us so far?
I don't know, they have to literally, if you bought a win, you gave $5.
Well, we can't let
Oh,
the
he's
court.
digging in.
Come here.
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Making sure that we won.
Port of Bremerton
I don't want the
commissioners,
port to pull ahead of the city of Port Orchard.
They're
so
whopping $15,
Yeah.
5 times 3.
We,
Do you want some more pins?
no, we're fine. Did these guys all get pens? No, we're, give Larry a call, let him know that we exceeded the port, so they have to step up and,
Let's give our extra pins and you can auction them off.
That's right.
either that or we could, put 6 of them
All
on
right.
in front of Larry.
We are to our discussion item this evening, which is PSRC Vision 2050, and Mr. Bond.
Yes, thank you. Tonight I'm here to talk about two issues, both related to PSRC Vision 2050 update. We originally had this scheduled for the work study meeting, but we had a light agenda tonight, and so we were able to give everybody the week off last week. So that's why the staff report is still in its work study format. PSRC is currently updating its long-range regional growth strategy plan, Vision 2040, to the 2050 planning horizon. A draft supplemental EIS for Vision 2050 has been released. Tonight, I am asking whether council wishes to comment on the draft update to Vision 2050. Vision 2050 includes 3 alternatives for how we're going to grow as a region, and so this is the 4 county regions, Snohomish, Pierce, King, and Kitsap counties. The alternatives include the no action alternative, which is essentially staying the course and continue to grow at the same rates that we've been growing at for the past 10 or so years. There is a transit-focused growth alternative, which calls for leveraging the investments in the fast ferries and ST3, which would call for really focusing 75% of all growth in the region to grow towards transit hubs, and so all the new stops on ST3 and around the fast ferries, with the remaining 25% of the growth going to more outlying areas. The final alternative is the reset urban growth alternative, which takes into consideration the growth that's occurred over the past 10 years that has maybe not followed the growth strategy as closely as the region had hoped, and which is a more diffuse strategy, and we'll see much more growth in the outlying areas with less growth going to the centers on the whole. So attached to the staff report, you'll find the draft environmental impact statement executive summary. And this really outlines what growth the region is planning for. And then midway through that document, you're going to find a matrix that includes the 3 alternatives in columns with stay the course as being the baseline. And then it looks at the other 2 alternatives relative to the stay the course alternative and tells you how the impacts will be higher, lower, or different, and tries to provide a real basic explanation. I don't expect all of you to read the full environmental impact statement, but I think this gives you a pretty good understanding of sort of how the environmental impacts of each of these alternatives would occur. So the question for council tonight is really, do you want to comment or express a preference for one of the alternatives over the others? You could express a preference for one alternative specifically, or a hybrid of the alternatives. And then the second question is, if you wish to comment on this, the comment deadline is April 29th or 26th. I can't remember, but we could take this forward again at our next work study meeting to finalize the comment letter based on the feedback I get from you tonight. The staff recommendation on this, based on reviewing the environmental impact statement and looking at our land capacity and how we've been growing, would be to look at the transit-focused growth alternative or the stay-the-course alternative, or consider a hybrid of the 2. And I think our comment letter, if we chose to recommend one or both of those alternatives, could say that we prefer these 2 alternatives or a combination of the 2 that gives some general guidance to the PSRC in terms of how to refine a preferred alternative when they finalize this document. The other comment that I suggested that we may want to make would be to include as part of the preferred alternative, because we wouldn't be resetting the urban growth. A lot of cities have grown way faster than we had anticipated. And so the question is, should those cities be taking reasonable measures to sort of fall in line and slow things down? And in some jurisdictions, maybe they don't have, they've underfunded transportation infrastructure, and that has fueled additional growth that, had they had impact fees or leveled the playing field, maybe that growth would have come into the metropolitan core or in places like Bremerton. And so I think we could choose to suggest that the vision express a desire to see things catch up in terms of what's happened over the last 10 years. So with that said, I'm happy to answer any questions on the draft EIS. There's a second part of this discussion, which I'll get to maybe once we've discussed the first piece.
Councilmember Cacciardi?
Am I reading it right that the bulk of Port Orchard falls within the HCT communities category?
The high-capacity transit, yes.
And so if we were to move from stay the course to transit focused, we're increasing our potential population growth by roughly 27% of where it exists today. It's a huge increase.
No, I don't think it's 27%. I think that ultimately, when we get to the KRCC level, Kitsap County is going to get a piece of the regional growth, and so there will be a higher percentage of regional growth going to transit communities, but we don't have a lot of transit communities on this side of the water. I think it will be a slight increase in allocation, but not, I don't think it's going to be distributed equally to all high-capacity transit centers. So,
I mean, there's a difference between a light rail station and a ferry dock. It really is.
Yes.
Mr. Clausen, I know
Well,
you're
in
involved.
reading the document, you speak to the foot ferry as considered high capacity, and then later it's referred to as the fast ferry. Is there a difference between the two in regards to this?
no, the foot ferry is high-capacity transit, and it provides access to the fast ferry system.
That's what I thought, but I just wanted to make sure I was clear on it.
Yeah,
so.
but I think once you look, I guess actually if you look at the capacity of the boats coming out of Port Orchard and the boats coming out of Bremerton, they're probably similar. You've got two boats making runs, and I don't know what the frequency is going to be once the second boat is up and running on the Bremerton-Seattle route, but I would imagine the capacity of the two systems is pretty similar.
Yeah, it's going to be very similar. The
Yeah.
vessels that we use to connect Port Orchard are actually larger than the one we use going to Seattle, so.
Yeah. So in my report, I outlined sort of what would be expected in terms of growth, and we had surplus land capacity as part of our last comprehensive plan update. I think we had room for at least 2,000 more people than we needed to plan for just in land area that was developable land. With the zoning changes that were adopted last week, I think that increases our land capacity further. And so I'm not terribly worried about Port Orchard's ability to accommodate this much growth. I think the difference is that under the transit-focused alternative, they're going to want to see more of that growth along our transit lines, which the bus service that we have currently, I don't think is high-capacity transit, but it could be at some point in the future, and then that would also be growth in proximity of the Port Orchard foot ferries.
I think a component of this is to remember, this is where our funding comes for transportation. And we want to reward or incentivize those folks, the investment that's been made. And so we need supporting transportation infrastructure to go with that. What we don't want, what I don't believe we want, is those dollars to go into the rural areas, because we can't build enough roads to accommodate this growth.
Yeah,
So, Councilmember Ashby?
well, there's a couple things I want to say, and Nick, if I'm misunderstanding this, please let me know. But basically, of the four-county region, Kitsap has approximately 6.62% of that population, in round numbers 7%. And when they're looking how they're going to allocate this additional 1.8 million, theoretically, they would allocate basically 7% to Kitsap. And then when it gets here, we, being the city of Port Orchard, as a high-capacity transit city, would share that 23% or whatever it was with the other high-capacity cities, which would be, I believe, all of them, Bremerton, Bainbridge Island, and I think Paulsbo too.
I think Paulsbo has chosen to, they were on the fence because they have planned high-capacity transit, but they don't have it today.
Okay.
And so PSRC gave them the option of going in either direction. I think along with that, Kingston, if it's recognized as a countywide center, would also be considered a high-capacity transit community. And so of the growth that's going into the unincorporated Kitsap County area, Kingston would see a lot of that as well.
Right. So what I'm saying is, I don't think you're going to see what you had originally thought as a 27% growth. I don't think that's correct. But I also I would rather see, because I think for infrastructure and everything we're trying to do, I'm going to refer to the development off of Phillips Road that we've been tracking a little bit, and I believe there's 127 homes out there. Now, I believe those 127 residential units down in Port Orchard will, if they were downtown, would have less of an impact on all of the infrastructure than having them out, 4 miles down Phillips Road and trying to get those people to schools, to jobs, and everywhere if we had them. So that's, to me, what is trying to be accomplished with this, is to get more people living where they have access to services rather than out further where we have to take infrastructure.
Makes sense.
In essence, we'd be increasing the density.
Correct. Or using the density that we have available.
Yeah, that's right where I was gonna go. We just modified our code and increased densities in certain areas. It's just the centers principle that we're talking about. We're trying to develop centers or nodes so that we can concentrate that growth and the infrastructure investment into one area.
And when Nick was talking about some of the cities that have grown more rapidly than had been anticipated, most of those are out farther. They're out because the land was cheaper, they could develop it cheaper, and what's happened now is they don't have the transportation infrastructure to get the people into work. So I personally would be supportive if the city wanted to write a letter in support of the high capacity or the transit-oriented development, or a combination with the stay the course. But I think we have to think, just as this is, out to 2050, and what's it going to look like then? And I'm glad I haven't tipped my water over, waving my hand around.
I've got a question.
Mr. Dorsey?
And I'm just kind of noodling on this. By going with the transit-focused growth, knowing how funding is allocated and how scoring is integral with that, by going this course, isn't this going to at least give Port Orchard additional points, additional opportunity for funding? So to me, it's kind of a no-brainer. Anything that could potentially, because we know that from a scoring opportunity in the regional, we don't have the air quality issues, so the CMAQ scores are non-existent. Anything to give the city a better potential to score for funding we have to go that route.
Mr. Clausen?
Well, I was just going to touch on that aspect of it as well. And I know in a lot of attempts we've made in trying to secure funding for Tremont and some of the applications, we were trying to make a connection to the centers and trying to tie it to a center so that it would score better than if it's not. And I think if we were to go with this transit alternative, that it would make it much easier in that kind of a situation to be able to demonstrate more competitive, I guess.
I believe you're correct. So, Mr. Bond, are you getting, Ms. Lucarelli, do you have a comment?
Well, I've always questioned the potential jobs that have been suggested, and I don't think that's even part of our discussion right now, but I think it seems off to me. But what do I know? It seems too high.
And subsequent to this, there's the countywide planning policies, and those allocations come in a separate process from this. This is the PSRC trying to vision and plan for overall growth in the Puget Sound region through 2050.
Right.
So that's
So the rest of it, I'm on the same page.
So, Mr. Bond, have you kind of gotten a feel
Yeah,
for
it
what
sounds
you're-
like the recommendation that I've made is in line with what type of letter you'd like to see, and so I can share a draft letter with the council before it goes out and express a preference for the transit-focused growth alternative, but say that the stay the course is also acceptable or some hybrid of the two, and to recommend that the plan identify that goals for taking reasonable measures to bend those cities that haven't followed the growth strategy to get them to fall in line with the numbers.
Is this a letter that you're wanting myself and the entire council to sign?
It'll be from, yeah, it can be from the entire city council. I think you can comment individually on this, citizens can comment. It's a regular SEPA process, but I think there was discussion at KRCC about making a recommendation from the entire Kitsap Regional Coordinating Council, but I think the counties and the cities are not having the same opinion with regard to which alternative is taken here. So I think each city's gonna write its own letter, and then the county's gonna write its letter advocating its position.
Yeah, I believe you're correct. So will that be, which council meeting you bring that back to?
You know, I will,
2 weeks, or is that too soon?
I'll bring it to the work study meeting. I'll email it out before the work study meeting, and then if we need to make any further revisions, we can do that at work study.
Okay. And if it doesn't end up on work study, it'll at least be back at 2 weeks from now as a discussion item at the tail end of the agenda. I'm leaning towards trying to make these meetings a little longer and more productive and not put things on the work study if we don't have to. I haven't seen what our next agenda looks like, but so far I'm planning on having a work study, but we'll get together tomorrow.
So there's a second part of this staff report. In addition to writing an EIS, we are starting to draft the policy language, which is going to be universal under all of the alternatives. And so I provided red line copies of both the environmental policy matrix and the growth, I believe it's the
page
growth.
number?
Starting on page 69, there's a matrix, and these are underlined strike-through versions of existing policies that are in Vision 2040, and these are the proposed amendments that are to be made. And so on this particular issue, this is a regional staff committee level document, and so I'm on the regional staff committee along with my colleagues from Paulsbo and Kitsap County and Bremerton, and with the other planning directors throughout the region, we're working on tweaking these this policy language. I'm mostly bringing this to your attention because I think when we have to update our comprehensive plan in 2024, there will probably be questions of where did this mandate come from, or why are we required to have a policy along these lines. And I feel like when we updated our comprehensive plan in 2015 for the 2016 update, there were a lot of those questions where I wasn't even here when the previous version of these policies had been written. I was working with another city, but I want to make sure that you're aware of this now so that when you see it again in 5 years, it won't be a surprise. I'm mostly comfortable with the language that's included here, but I did draft a letter that is in the back page of your packet, and it's a 2-page letter just making some comments about certain policies. One of my biggest concerns out of the entire document is that the environment chapter and the development patterns chapter seem to have conflicting policies. In the environmental chapter, for instance, it says protect and restore forests, and it specifically talks about urban tree canopy. And so when I hear protect urban tree canopy, it concerns me because Port Orchard has a lot of undeveloped urban land, which they also, in their growth strategy chapter, talk about increasing densities. And it's very hard to protect existing stands of trees in Port Orchard while maximizing the development potential of that property. And so I'm asking them to change this language to really talk about restoring tree canopy as urban development occurs rather than simply protecting it, because I think if you follow the politics on Bainbridge Island, tree protection is a major issue there, and it's actually preventing Bainbridge from meeting its growth allocations. And I think that we really need to recognize the local conditions of Port Orchard here and try to soften that language so that we want to protect trees, especially in critical areas, but where we have developable land, we allow them to be cut and then replanted as part of landscaping plans so that they grow up and they're not hazard trees or there's not a blowdown risk. So that's one of the comments that we have. They also had some comments about doing stormwater retrofit projects, which that makes my antenna stand up, and I think Mark's as well. I wanted to make sure that that was related to transportation projects, that as we do transportation projects funded by PSRC, yes, we will retrofit the stormwater system to meet current standards, but we're not going to go looking for ponds to upgrade or to enlarge or to connect streets to stormwater ponds where they don't currently exist without doing a road project. So were there any comments from council on any of the policies that you saw that you would like me to convey to PSRC? This is not a letter that will come from the council. This is just a letter that I will send to my counterparts and hopefully get these changes incorporated before this is released publicly for public
It's
comment.
draft form, it's showing this coming from me, so it's not gonna come from me, it's gonna come from you.
Yeah, that was actually, I wrote this prior to talking to Paul Ingram at PSRC, and he said that as a regional staff committee member, it's appropriate for me to make the comment directly to PSRC. But I don't want to comment where my counsel isn't in agreement with me.
Heads going sideways or up and down?
Thank you.
Questions on this matter? Is that it for your staff report on this?
That's all.
Okay. We are to our council committee reports. First is Finance Committee. They had a meeting tonight that we canceled. Mr. Clausen, I think, has some financial reports.
Well, actually, Noah gave us, at least Sean and I, some copies of the financials, and I think they got passed out to
Yep,
the rest
they
of the
did.
council, so I would ask, actually Noah, if he wants to highlight any of the document.
Sure, I can do that now. So we talked real briefly about just kind of the current state of the sales tax. Again, where we're at through February, we're growing at a 5% rate, which is very healthy. Again, we budgeted at 3% growth. So as long as we stay above our budgeted rate, that is a positive sign. Likewise, for the REIT revenue coming in, so far we've received about 20% of our biennial budget, which is really strong so far for the first 2 months of the year. So all good signs for the first 2 months of 2019.
Okay. Questions for Noah on the financials? Pretty self-explanatory. Okay, and we'll need to get another meeting date on the calendar, so maybe the three finance committee members could put their heads together before the end of the night, and then we'll get that on the calendar. So economic development and tourism, I don't know if you've met.
No, not since our last meeting. We will be meeting, I think it is April
8th.
8th. Yeah, at 9:30 here at council chambers.
Okay. Utilities?
We haven't met, but our next meeting is April 15th, 9:30 here at City Hall.
Okay, and I heard something about SAC here earlier.
Yes, we changed the date from April 17th to the 24th.
Okay. Land use met yesterday. Does anybody want to give a report for Scott?
I'm trying to pull up the agenda here. Give me 1 second. Skip over me and we'll
Okay,
come back.
we'll come back to you. Lodging tax, have you?
April.
In April. Okay. How about chimes and lights?
April 15th, 3:30 here at City Hall.
Okay. And I was at Housing Kitsap this morning. We don't have everything solved, but we're still working on the financial statements. You know, it's encouraging, I guess. It's a long road there. And, you know, at one point, as everybody read in the paper, we were going to run out of cash by March 1st and the agency wouldn't exist anymore. And we know we have enough cash to get us to the end of the fiscal year is end of June, and we actually have till the end of 2019. We know we have enough cash. We're still not operating in the black. We had an executive session about a number of pieces of property that we're considering listing and selling to generate more one-time revenue. But we need to, as soon as we get the software conversion in place, we need to analyze properties and realize, you know, I know these are subsidized rents, but we can't help people if we don't exist. So we definitely have to look at rents and other forms of revenue. And there's still an opportunity potentially to partner with another agency, possibly Bremerton Housing Authority, but they aren't interested in having those kind of discussions, and rightly so, until we have financial statements and they know what they're getting themselves into. So I sit on the finance committee. We meet weekly to review the financials and the software, the steps we're making on the software conversions. And today was the monthly board meeting. We're meeting with the state auditors again next Monday here at Port Orchard City Hall. So it's a lot of fun stuff.
Did you want to give one for Kitsap Transit since you had a coup last week?
Oh, yeah, I ran the first half hour of the meeting. I can't even remember what was on the agenda. It was last week. It's been such a whirlwind. Maybe you
Well,
recall?
Yes, actually, I thought the big item was the Carlisle 2, which
That's
was in the paper, that we're moving ahead with renovation, refurbishment of the Carlisle 2 to keep it in service. I thought that was a pretty big deal.
Coast Guard let us know that we need to do $1.2 million worth of upgrades to keep it in service. So it isn't as viewed as important to other communities that as it is to Port Orchard and Bremerton. So I'm glad but the board agreed that it was important that we have a backup vessel. We have the Waterman coming online in the next 30 days or so. Yeah. And eventually the Carlisle will become a backup boat, but we need to have one of those. So thank you, Jay. And land use, Mr. Cacciardi?
Yeah, so just returning back, we had three items for discussion. The first was a request for us to analyze marked parking spaces on Kitsap Street in front of the church. Like, for example, around City Hall where they're specifically painted or marked. And I think the discussion that we shared was, kind of the policy and the amount of room we provide. We could actually go backwards and have less parking spaces on Kitsap. So I think no action is probably best right now. There was also a little sidebar about these types of businesses having parking requirements for their business needs and not being reliant on just street parking. So I think we're going to leave that as be for right now. At least that was kind of the consensus. We went on to hear from enforcement about updating to Port Orchard Municipal Code as relates to nuisances, administration and enforcement, and vehicle service and repair. And there's some ideas just to give us some additional tools to monitor and to mitigate some of these nuisances. I know the enforcement officer, Doug, is going to be preparing some additional information that will end up going to the blank here to the Planning Commission. Thank you.
And I have an
for their
update on
review.
that. One of those items, because we have a pressing case, is going to come to council first. The rest of them will go to Planning Commission, but we determined that we didn't want to wait until late May to have something on the books that would allow us to deal with an enforcement issue.
Great. Perfect. And then the final item for discussion, we continue to talk about affordable housing. And Councilmember Chang was just doing some conversation around, I think they basically said around ADUs, accessory dwelling units, and are there opportunities for us to make a more streamlined process for those that may, take advantage of an ADU, perhaps some pre-approved plans for some of these modular units, prefab units that could be just expedite the process, reduce some of the costs to address affordable housing and that front. So more information to come from that. Fred, did I miss anything there?
Yeah, that's a good summary.
Great, thank you.
Wonderful. Mayor's report. I got a couple things. If we have on the Community Service Day, staff and I met today to identify some additional things to do, because if we have nice weather, I think I'll have about 350 volunteers. Kitsap Bank is going to do their Earth Day project in conjunction with us. I've got some service clubs, and then I have the Latter-day Saints. So I think we're going to put some we're talked about adding some beauty bark to Etta Turner Park, and then just across the bridge on the pedestrian path, that point. We've been doing a lot of vegetation removal, and we're going to stockpile some of the grindings for the dog park out of McCormick Village. That's a little light out there versus paying the contractor to provide more materials. I think we're going to stockpile some of our own materials and then put them in there for some volunteers to rake out. So we're looking so if you've got some other ideas, get them to me. I think, now my fear is we're going to plan all these extra activities and it's going to rain like it did last year, and then I get 100 people that turn out and we'll have all these materials piled all over the city. But the big thing we're going to do is 100 yards of topsoil at Van Zee Park. Now that the water treatment is done. So mark your calendar. I'd love for you guys to join me and the community out there on our 4th annual Community Service Day. I was down in Olympia the last couple of days, Sunday and Monday, for AWC's, wasn't the action days, it was the lobby days, they called it. And had a nice meeting with Senator Randall yesterday with a couple of other mayors. She's concerned about the needle exchange program, and we have some concerns about it too, to the health district. And so we had some productive conversation there with her. As you know, hopefully you know, the House budget was released. We were looking for $1 million for that lift station. We got $250,000. I guess that's better than a poke in the eye, but we're going to get that, and or at least that's in the House's version of the budget. The Senate hasn't released their budget yet. We got no money for in either transportation budget for the Sedgwick interchange, Sedgwick 16 interchange. But as Mark and I were talking, at least we elevated the conversation. It's in a transportation package that probably isn't moving forward, and it'll be my job and our lobbyist's job to keep that in that transportation package as it probably comes back next year and get some traction, I hope. So we passed at the last council meeting a street cut moratorium, and after talking to our insurance company, they didn't like that language. They felt a prohibition was a much better term, and so you passed the ordinance with something to the effect to the attorney's final form. So we took it upon ourselves to replace moratorium with prohibition with moratorium. It was just our insurance company didn't like that language. So I always like to listen to your insurance company. So Janine gave me some great Facebook stats today. So from January 1st, we have 250 more followers, up to 1,920. And, you know, if you haven't driven down Tremont lately, we're driving on the other side of the road, which is kind of cool. We did a post on that. We reached 20,000 people, a little over 20,000 people, which is great. When we opened the McCormick Village Park, we reached 14,000 people. Jedi Mentors was Community Day, or Jedi Special Day, was up there in the top 5 there at number 3 at 11,000 people. The original tornado report was at 7,300. Natural gas leak related to the tornado, when that went out at 6,600. And when we posted our most recent front counter position for Public Works, we reached almost 6,000 people too on that job posting. So since December 1st, we've made 56 posts and reached 105,000 people. So I think I'm not a Facebook fan, but for the city it works pretty doggone good. I passed out the chief candidates. A couple of you are participating in those interviews tomorrow all day long. Thank you for your support, and I hope I can see all or most of you tomorrow evening at 6:30 when there won't be all 5 of these folks, but 2 or 3 of them will probably be here, a chance to interact with the public and to you guys in a less formal manner, and then they'll leave, and I hope to get some feedback from the public and from you folks, so I hope to see you here. Last week, it was a busy week, but the funnest thing I did was I do those mock city council meetings at Marcus Whitman. Mr. Gerard, at least once a day, sent me a question from a student. And their questions usually weren't a question. It was 2 or 3 questions. So this was probably one of my favorites from Friday. A student, Caitlin, from 7th grader from Marcus Whitman. Her question, and was what's more, so here's her series of questions that was supposed to be her question. What's more important for a city right now? Building new homes and commercial space, or rehabilitating, expanding, or better utilizing existing homes and storefronts? And her next question is, some people in our community say we have traffic problem. What do you think? How would you mitigate those concerns or change the situation? Her third part of her question was, if you received $1 million grant to use for the city any way you wanted, what would you do with it and why? I mean, I think these are just tremendous questions from a 7th grader. So here was my response. So, wow, Caitlin, these are really good questions. Your first question really falls into property rights issues. I didn't run this by the attorney, so I winged it. Hope I'm right. People own property and have ideas what they want to do with the property they own. The city provides zoning so that commercial and industrial uses don't get built in residential neighborhoods, which wouldn't be compatible. I personally live in a historic home. Some people want a modern home. It's simply an answer. The simple answer is these decisions are market-driven. So her next question, transportation is challenging because building and maintaining our roads are extremely expensive, and we simply don't have sufficient resources to keep up with demand. Our long-term plans call for development in our city that clusters development in centers that provide live, work, and retail options that are all walkable, so we don't need as many cars because we simply can't build enough capacity on our roads to keep up with the number of people moving into the Puget Sound region. Now, the third question on the $1 million, if we really got $1 million, I know that we would have to have a planning commission meeting. First we'd go on a field trip, okay? And then we'd have a planning commission meeting about it, or two. Then we'd have a work study and a couple of council meetings, and then Jerry would have to have a comment. We'd have to provide Jerry and everybody else, comment. So, and then by the time we did all of that, the $1 million project wouldn't cost $1 million, and then I'd have to give the money back because the cost overruns. So, I assumed in this scenario that I was king for a day. So that's what I told her. So if I was king for a day and received a $1 million grant with no strings attached, and I would repurpose our waterfront parking and provide more open space that everyone could enjoy. So that was, but I know I wasn't king for a day. So, so that was a lot of fun last week, but it was a bit time consuming. On a serious notes, so we've got we budgeted roughly $15,000 for the charging stations, the electric cars here. We've got those installed. We did it for about $3,000, the 2 charging stations. When we did the budget, we weren't sure if we were going to have to pour pedestals up here in the gravel lot or where we had the power to do that. So, that being said, we've identified the costs associated with replacing the chimes. And it's the city. It's a computer. We've got to run a wire, some Wi-Fi to that computer. It's an amplifier, it's new speakers, and it's an interface for whatever the clock hand. It won't be tied to those current clock hands, but we know we want it to interface with whatever the future brings. So the cost is roughly $8,000. So we have money in the budget. I just want, before I go out and run off and spend $8,000, as everybody, I know Cindy wants it done yesterday. So I think if we want to make sure that if we have it for the festivals, we should probably get on it.
I'm in her camp.
You're in her camp? Okay, so I'm seeing heads. I know it's a lot of money, but our own guys are doing the work, and that we've identified the individual components. And
How long have we been in this building?
20 years.
So, just shy of 20 years. We get 20 years out of the previous one.
Yeah.
$8,000 over 20 years. That's not a bad investment. So.
All right, we'll move forward.
God, it's been 20 years.
It's been 20 years. A couple years ago, we had to finally replace the chairs too. Remember?
Yeah, well, I remember that. Those were older.
Hopefully, all of you have been to McCormick Village Park. We're just getting rave reviews on it. Mark and I, Thomas, we've all been making our journeys around out there. What I'm recognizing, and it's just going to have to be in the next biennial budget, is those trails are long, and we're going to have to maintain all that stuff and pick up garbage out there. So at some point, we're going to need, I don't know if it's a gator or something along those lines for our guys to, otherwise we're going to be schlepping garbage bags in and out of a lot of trails out there. We probably are going to have to build some sort of a maintenance shed at some point too, to put apparatus, garbage bags, and so on and so forth. So we've got this beautiful amenity, and now we got to figure out how we're going to maintain it. And so,
Well, feedback already has been, holy cow, I went to park there the other day, and it was already full. So that has come up, but people are really enjoying it and utilizing it. So.
Yes, it's been.
I just wanted to add, I was there on Sunday And there were no less than 18 cars parked and up to maybe almost 27, and it just kept filling up. It was incredible how many people were using it. It was just happy.
Early last week, I popped in a couple times on a weeknight, and 60, 70 people in where I could see them, and there's people in the trails. I mean, so there's cars, but there's also the trail network from the housing developments where
And
people
lots
are
of
walking.
dogs.
And lots of dogs. Yeah, it's a winner. It's a winner. It sure is. Okay. I think we're all in agreement of that. Beck and I and John were at the KRCC Affordable Housing Task Force. And so John and I went to lunch after that meeting, and it's amazing how you can sit through a meeting and you both walk out with different understandings of the ask that when we left there. And so I spent some time with Mayor Erickson the last couple days, and so I circled back to her, and we were both kind of right. So the ask for us, and Beck and I both kind of got our hackles up here on this one. I don't have a vote. You guys all do. They're asking us to declare an emergency. And the intent of this emergency would, an affordable housing emergency. So their goal would be for, if we all agreed that there was an emergency, that there would be a county-wide measure on the ballot for a property tax. And Beck and I both spoke to, but gosh, we can't even pass a school levy in our community. How can we ask our voters? And my concern with a county-wide measure is North Kitsap would carry the day, and it would be imposed on our voters. So if they're not successful in getting all of us to do it, then individual jurisdictions will most likely declare an emergency and then take to their voters a measure. So the ask or my homework assignment from that committee was, how does our council feel about, and we're not asking you to take a vote at all, for our discussion back there about declaring an emergency that could entail us going to the voters and asking for a property tax.
What I asked for that day, and that what I would need personally to be effective in the discussion, is I would like to see the true numbers, rather than just, we've got an emergency. I want to know what the numbers are, and I would specifically like to know what they are for Port Orchard, because we're not talking homelessness. This is a different audience. This is to make sure that your families can have an apartment to rent, or that they can afford to buy a home. And I would like to see those numbers. Now, personally for myself, we don't have another meeting. I think it's in May. Anyway, it's a couple of months out. I have meetings scheduled with a realtor, and I have meetings scheduled with a lender, so that I can find out, how many people are coming to the lender and they can't afford a house. Or anyway, I've started my due diligence to get some, rather than just, oh, we've got a crisis. They may not be able to build homes on Bainbridge Island, but my instinct is that there is affordable housing available in Port Orchard, but I don't know that. So I'm starting to do my due diligence to find out exactly what it's like. The other question I had is this real estate tax that they would propose is 50 cents a thousand, but it also can only be used for certain income levels. So that needs more definition too. Anyway, I came away just kind of shaking my head, because it was a lot of, well, this is what we think. Well, I need to know what we know. So that was kind of my position when I left.
And following on that, my comment to Mayor Erickson yesterday was, it seems like we got the cart ahead of the horse here. We're asking for money, and we don't know what the solution is. Let's identify the solution, and then are there existing funding sources that we can redirect? And I feel pretty strongly the approach that we've taken is in the code we've just adopted. You know, we've put incentives like property tax abatement, and we've upzoned certain areas, and then strengthen our design standards so that we don't just give it away to the developer, so we're getting a better product. So I think, as Beck spoke to, we have, in my opinion, relative to the rest of the county. Yes, housing prices are going up, and so are rents, but relative to across the pond or the north end of the county, I think we're doing things to help with this, and I don't think the first thing we should, bullet out of the gun should be more taxes myself. So, Mr. Chang?
We talked about this at land use, and I'm just going to reiterate it, that we heard that the county is partnering with the city of Bremerton to fund an affordable housing inventory and market analysis to identify housing needs through the county and city of Bremerton. And the question in the committee is, if we, the city of Port Orchard, wanted to participate in this inventory, this would hopefully get more data and a definition, because, yeah, when I hear
That's
affordable
interesting,
housing-
because we had a county-wide meeting and nobody brought that up.
Well, this went to a smaller audience. This actually went to volunteers for the severe weather shelter. So it was, and we got it in March 13th, so I don't know how it was distributed or not. But
I
this
think
is
the
something.
difference is again, homelessness versus affordable housing. It's
It's
two different topics.
That's
Two
exactly
different
correct.
I would agree, and it's interesting that they mentioned affordable housing in a response about homelessness, because if you just look at this bullet point itself, it's, and I agree with Beck that it sounded like a good step to get this information, to find out what the inventory was all over the county, including the city, to see, if we have an issue or not. I thought it was.
It was my understanding at the meeting that the county has an RFP out to do the count. So I assumed that included all the jurisdictions. The other thought that just went through my head after I left the meeting is, I'm going to go back to our school situation here, and when we talk affordable housing, typically you're talking younger families and families with children. And so if we're going to, they have to have schools to go to too. So, I see it, if we can't pass school levies or bonds, how can we really encourage I don't know. It was just a dilemma for me. And so I'm now going to focus on it.
I've yet to hear anybody speak that we should make a declaration here so far. So, Councilmember Rosa Pepe?
No, you were talking about the cart before the horse, and I mean, just initially with what you said, both you and Beck, it's half-baked. There's no information. It sounds like let's declare it for not a good reason. I don't want to be like the city of Seattle, put money out there.
So, okay. So I got enough direction to
Well, and I
report back.
think certainly you're addressing the issue of declaring an emergency, and I agree with the conversations here that we're not there yet. I think we're a long ways before we're even can address it somewhat intelligently, but there were other issues too that occurred at that meeting. One in particular that I was interested in, it was mentioned that there are nonprofit development corporations out there that are building affordable housing in other communities, and they're not doing it in Kitsap. So one of the homework assignments we asked of the county was to reach out to them and find out why not. What's going on in Kitsap that doesn't make it something that of interest to them. So there's a lot of homework, I think, that needs to be done before I would be comfortable with declaring an emergency. So.
My last item is, while you were out of town, Mr. Price was out doing his job and doing a fine job. And I heard from all of the car dealers in town on Friday. And I told Mr. Titus I would share his concerns with you, and I heard from Mr. Velist. And, they all had balloons on their cars on the nice day, and they were flopping around on their cars. And a year ago, we passed code that says you can't have balloons tied, for displays so I just, none of them were happy. So Mr. Velist said, well, but we've been doing this for 30 years. And he said, what about, and then of course they're pointing the fingers at each other. What about the electronic reader board at the other end of town and at that car dealership? And I said, well, that happened before the code, so their grandfather. Well, we've been doing balloons for 30 years. And I said, yeah, but have you been using the same balloon for 30 years? So I tried to make light of it, but so I'm just sharing that our car dealers are all uniformly dissatisfied with the city council for the action we took to outlaw balloons. So
just related to the balloons?
yes.
And no banners?
That was their issue on Friday.
I
That
thought
was
the
the
feather
balloons.
signs were
I mean, there's a
gonna be more of a-
That's what I
there's
meant,
a piece of it is environmental, but a bigger piece is what our concern was, distracting drivers. Because as I was in my office looking out at Velist Motors, and the balloons were doing, I said, I know they're doing exactly what you want them to do, but it's not what we want.
And
Anyway,
I don't think that rule is new. I think that was a rule in our old code as well. It just hasn't been enforced.
That's interesting. Okay. But could you confirm that before I return those phone calls?
Yes, I'll double check.
Thank you.
When it was implemented.
So, all right. So that's all I have in the mayor's report. We are to staff reports. Mr. Dorsey?
Yeah, so as a follow-up to the Land Use Committee, we did look at that intersection of Kitsap and Sydney, and three of the 4 legs had a 30-foot sight distance yellow. The one in front of the church was actually 50, so we've blacked out 20 feet, so they've gained 20 feet.
Yep, and it's already been done. I saw it on my walk into that.
As far as the chimes and lights issue, once we get this new system, I'm wondering who Spotify or Pandora is going to volunteer to play whatever music they want to play. That's just throwing it out there. That'll
Not
be the
going to
next.
get more staff to program music.
That'll be the next question. Is like who gets to
find
choose
somebody.
who gets to choose the music? Because we're going to have lots more options than show tunes. Phase 4, as the mayor alluded to, Phase 4 is now in force at Tremont, which now between Pottery and Port Orchard Boulevard, you're in the 2 center lanes, but at least you're in your own lane. And that'll stay that way really till the end of the project.
And today was traffic hell on Tremont because they were
Well,
doing landscaping.
so they're doing driveways.
Yep.
They're doing individual driveways, prepping for that paving, so that's requiring flagging.
Yeah.
So I did get a nasty gram from a business owner down there that likes to send really caustic emails, and he was very quick to send another one.
Mark, I know they took down the no left turn sign onto Port Orchard Boulevard.
It's there.
Yeah,
So
they had it up. It disappeared for some reason.
Okay, I didn't.
It's
that
now
was
back
one.
up
Okay.
because I got stuck after I left a meeting last week, and they insisted that it was up. I'm like, no, it's not there. So, my sense is if you're going there, don't quote me on this community, but
You're on
if you
camera.
go up and there's like nobody there, I did it. I turned down.
Goodness.
But if there's cars there, you're backing everything up. So
It wasn't that, it was the sign was gone, and I was wondering if that was causing any
It was
problems,
gone and
but
it was back.
it's back.
It's back
It
now?
was somebody. It's hanging on some 16-year-old's wall right now. So
Okay,
just like my City of Phoenix parking sign when I lived down there happened to end up on my wall. So, but that was 1980. So statute of limitations is up.
thank you.
It was the only furniture I had. I had that and a beanbag chair, and that was it. My whole apartment. That was it.
We're doing chief interviews tomorrow, so I'm confident in about 60 or 90 days we'll have a police chief sitting here to
To kick me under the table.
kick you under the table.
Rockwell Park, my advice there is don't blink because it's moving fast. And Puget Sound Energy is probably out there now finishing up. We finally got them, after a lot of pressure, to remove the guy pole for that new pole they set. So it's out of our way now. We can just get rocking. So
It's looking great.
so that's it.
Okay, Noah?
I'll just give you a brief software update. So we've fully and successfully integrated over from our AP, and when we just completed our payroll and our time entry systems this last payroll cycle. Again, it was a lot of work because both employees in the city as well as payroll staff had to shadow both systems. So we were doing it both in our old system and our new system and verifying that everything was coming across correctly. So it was successful. We learned some reporting elements that we need to adjust, but that's what you hope to get out of this kind of slow conversion, that you're being thoughtful about it. And so our last module will be the utility module, again, which we're hoping to be fully converted over by the end of May. And so hopefully by the end of June, we'll be completely on the new system and no more shadowing of the old one. At this point, we're just continuing to shadow and transition over when we feel we've completely got everything under control.
So to Jerry's question from 2 weeks ago, when do we go live on that system and people are gonna have to start making changes to their online banking and their automatic payments?
I believe it's in May.
In May?
Yeah. So there'll be more messaging to come, Jerry, and for the customers. And as we're receiving phone calls, we're starting to give folks those dates, but we're just hesitating to make sure that we're teed up properly for the transition and the timing's correct. Yep.
Okay.
And then the other piece, chief interviews tomorrow. Everyone's aware of that. And we also have HR interviews on Thursday. So we've got some applications, some good applications, and we're starting to schedule interviews for our new HR coordinator. So that's exciting.
I'm still under protest on that one. Mr. Bond?
The only thing I have to report is our new zoning code, I believe, takes effect tomorrow, assuming that the notice got in last Friday, which I think it did. So we have all of the applications updated, and we will begin administering that tomorrow, and we're hoping for a smooth rollout. I think it'll go well.
Okay, Sharon?
Nothing for me tonight.
Okay, Brandy? I have nothing either. Okay, Jerry?
I had a couple of questions. One of the things I was wondering is this past year, people running for reelection for down in Olympia used the building in the evening for theirs. I personally think that they should have to pay. Do they have to pay?
I don't believe so because it's another governmental agency.
So anybody running could use it?
Well, no, they
but
can't
only
use- here-
re-elections?
No. And they can't, okay, so there's a distinction here. They can't use it for campaign purposes. So
But I
how
think
we
they were.
No, they've used it for, Michelle Caldier has used it, a matter of fact, they're town hall meetings. So like this last weekend, Emily Randall, she didn't hold one in Port Orchard. She held one in the Cape Peninsula and in Bremerton. So if someone that holds elected office in Olympia, or, it'd be our senator or our two
right.
representatives, and they want to hold a town hall meeting, prior to session, after session, during the session, it's about the business in Olympia, informing the public. Here's what's going on. So the current town hall meeting that Emily did was, here's what's going on in Olympia, here's where we're at in the process. A lot of times they do those right after the session. Here's what happened in the session, and just before heading into the session. Now, sometimes those town hall meetings are on the cusp of election cycles, but
Right, okay.
they cannot campaign though here when they use the city hall.
Okay, 'cause I
And when they're
thought they
here,
were-
I usually sit in the audience, and sometimes I facilitate them.
Okay.
Yeah, and you're welcome to attend. I mean, there are delegation. I would recommend our citizens attend those.
Okay, another question, I have about 4, but I don't know if I'll have time. You were talking about.
I took up some of
If
your
I come
time.
up Kitsap Street and stop at the stoplight, or stop sign, and look down toward Bay Street by the church, I have a very difficult time seeing cars coming up the hill in my van, because there's usually a van parked in the very first spot. And I'm finding as I age that it's becoming more and more dangerous. So just something to be aware of, because we had a pretty bad crash when I was working down a year ago, because I was down at the,
So
working on the front.
where we shortened that parking is on Kitsap and not on the
Oh,
Sydney
okay.
portion. And there are signs on Sydney that say limited sight distance to make those drivers aware. And I drive
They
that.
come
street.
up that first, I mean, they're
Oh,
coming up at a pretty good clip.
Yes, they do.
Okay, another question I was wondering on this project here, you got some special funds, and Bainbridge.
Not yet.
Well, okay, but, okay, I've been having all evening, opportunity zones. And you said something about Bainbridge not wanting to participate. And I was just wondering, even on the Puget Sound,
You can hear he said that. Randy.
anyway, I was wondering, because I'm feeling that maybe they're, even though you said they wanted to be part of the transportation part, that they're wanting to keep more of an elitist and not have the growth there. Am I wrong in assuming that?
Well, this, you know, dollars have come from special buckets and can only be spent on certain, you know, things. This is the Public Facilities District, so it's a portion of the state's sales tax that goes to the Public Facilities District. We're paying the tax, and it could be up $18 to $20 million. It's over a 20-year period. So those dollars can only be used on those public facilities. The other piece we were talking about with Mr. Bond, that's the Puget Sound Regional Council, and it's regional planning and
Right.
transportation dollars, which is different
Well,
funding
I see
bucket than
that.
this.
I just have gotten the feeling lately that they want to be more of an elitist community, and so limiting the growth on Bainbridge
I
Island.
can't comment on that.
Okay, I just, that's the feeling that I'm
I
getting.
share your feeling, but I can't
Okay.
comment on it.
So that, and this one's just on my own, since I have to maintain down on the street, and I know that's probably not possible, but it sure would be nice if the homeowners that live downtown had one parking space dedicated to them in front of their home, so that during holidays and that, if they had company, they could have a place for their company to park, and people could use it if they maybe asked the homeowner if they were going to use it or something. But it's just, there's a lot of times that the people start coming very, very early to get a parking spot, especially for 4th of July. And then your company has no place to park. And since we're expected to maintain and do all the work on the street and keep the grass mowed and that, it would be nice that we at least had one spot to park. Just an idea that I've thought about a lot in the last couple of years. Okay, thank you.
Thanks for sharing. Mr. Hunter, you're the only one left in the audience. Would you like to comment on anything? I'm good. So, he did today in our Community Service Day meeting, he was advocating that this day be instead be funded out of Public Works, it comes out of the mayor's budget. It should have his own line item, and I was, come on.
Good idea.
I thought it was ingenious of him, but I said no. All right, so we're going to head into an executive session for 20 minutes. I'm sorry. To discuss potential litigation under RCW 4220-110. And from that, we're going to head into a brief bargaining session. So we're going to start out with a 20-minute executive session, and then I'll come out, adjourn the meeting, and then we will go into a bargaining session.